Wishing you a Merry Christmas. This is Radio Bath.
Welcome back to our second segment. We are with Arabella Tresilian, a professional mediator. Welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Cynthia. It's lovely to be here.
It's a pleasure. We met quite a while ago at a networking event. And I just had a very good first impression. You have this, bright personality. And when you said, I'm a mediator, and I said, yeah, you need a bright personality for those mediation meetings. So tell me, how did you get into it?
Well, I spent many years really in management consultancy, quite a lot in health and social care, but also in private organizations, local authorities, doing things like interim management, so managing teams where there had been difficulty, or strategic development and looking at how to bring a business or an organization on. And often there was this interplay between good partnership and overcoming difficulties. And I became more and more interested in how you could work through those difficulties to really bring out the best in everyone. And so I think it was about 5 years ago, I said, right, that's it. I'm going to train in mediation, and I completely fell in love with it, and I've been doing that full time ever since.
Yeah. Well, what's happening in the industry these days? What's happening with business people and colleagues after the pandemic, as the economy wakes up again?
Well, the pandemic has been an enormous challenge for businesses, obviously. So much flux and change, and people having to think on their feet and make decisions very, very quickly. So those are really the perfect conditions for people to get kind of out of sync with each other, or to have made decisions that didn't add up, and people start to feel regret, remorse, resentment towards each other. And we've been isolated from each other, whereas we might have had those chats over the kettle in the coffee room or whatever. Our communication has come down to, the Teams meeting or, the phone call. So that has left people a little bit isolated sometimes. And I've seen many cases erupting that probably wouldn't have done in different conditions. So it's really tough, and it needs a huge amount of compassion, because we've all, we are going through the mill. There's an opportunity, I think, for fresh thinking, but also for some honest, difficult conversations for some people within management, business partners particularly.
And I think it's time for renewed relationships as well, because I find that things that we can write over email is typically things we would never say in front of someone's face. And because, as you said, we've been isolated, we've become perhaps less human in many ways. And maybe we've thrown a couple of words around that we shouldn't have, or maybe we've taken things a little bit too personally because we didn't see the face reaction or the body language of the person. Yeah.
Yeah, we come to business as professionals and so on, but underneath all of that, we're all humans. And the thing that I love about this work is that it's about the psychology of being a human being, really. And that is that we all have feelings, needs, values. And that's what brings us to set up a business. It's that sort of driving, motivating factor. So when those things get knocked or hurt, it's actually really difficult for us to know how to work our way around that in a way that doesn't kind of either explode everything or kind of avoid the problem.
Now, you work with lots of different people, whether they're colleagues, business partners, or anything. When two people are thinking about working together, and let's say they're not in any work relationship yet, what are some of the things that you would advise them to look into about each other to make them decide, well, should I partner with you or should we just stay friends?
That's such a lovely question.
You might as well get preventative, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Before you open that company, register with the
Yeah. I mean,
late.
Being a business partnership, it's a really intimate relationship in a certain sense. And I guess with any intimate relationship, it's important to be clear about what you want out of it. So I think within setting up a company or an organization, one of the really helpful things you can do is understand the exit, the end point for everyone. Is this, is one party in it to be able to, build a business quickly and exit it successfully, and is the other party maybe there that this will be part of their lifestyle and it will bring them income and they will be with it for 20 years and it's going to, they can draw money from it, that they can pay for their family holidays. I mean, these are very different kind of directions in terms of how you might anticipate the finances of your business going. So just sort of asking where would we see this finishing? This business or this relationship finishing may feel counterintuitive, but actually it's a really great way of kind of bringing to the surface some of the fundamental differences you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people, when they start something, they don't ask, how do you want it to end?
Yeah.
And many partnership agreements are just so excitedly talking about how we will start, how we will grow. And there's not really any proper clauses, unless you get a proper lawyer to look at it, of exit, and everything, or succession. Interesting. I also find that your value system is quite important, isn't it? Some people, sometimes when you work with someone with differing values, they can complement each other very well, different working styles. But I think certain things like some people just clash in terms of the way they can trust each other because they don't really operate from the same values. You'd be surprised how much integrity is very not important for some people. Just
Yes.
money is important. Money
Yes.
is your top value. Integrity is number 14.
Yeah.
Whereas your partner is all about integrity and team and doing good. And, it doesn't matter how sexy the business idea is.
Yes. And that's really difficult to kind of clarify at the beginning, isn't it? And I think that's why there's that value in taking time, isn't it? Or maybe having someone else help you look at those things. Like I know that's some of the work that you're so good at doing is, being having a third person involved who can ask the difficult questions, because we very rarely ask those questions of each other. We're too polite generally, aren't we?
It's funny when I do partnership alignments, and I'm sure you get this too. When you are in the room with one of them, they'll say, "Can you ask this in the next section?" Because they want to ask that difficult question. But it's nice to have you around so you can ask that question, and I'll be the reply person. I want to talk more about the common mistakes, some of your ideas around the common challenges that you face in your experience with clients. But first, let's enjoy a bit of music. We'll be back with Arabella Tresilian after this.
Radio Bath, made in Bath.
Welcome back to Brave Business Conversations. We are still with Arabella Tresilian. I have been pronouncing your name like it was a Spanish name, but apparently not. It's Cornish.
My surname is Cornish, but I so love your pronunciation.
Arabella Tresilian.
Yeah,
I feel
let's
like
go
I'm
with
going
that.
to have some tapas after this.
Let's.
So, back to that serious subject of mediation.
Yeah.
Does it have to be a serious thing? Do you have a few laughs in those meetups with your clients?
It's completely. Laughter is such a good way of kind of processing stress and distress as well. And actually, even within the process of a mediation, there's an amazing point where suddenly you'll see two individuals, one will crack a joke and the other will laugh, and you just think, oh my gosh, this work is so beautiful. It's that the difficulties build up and they become just all encompassing. But generally, conflict really happens between people who originally cared about each other, who got on, who saw eye to eye. So actually, yeah, there is always scope for some humor at the right time, at the right place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, then the British are so good with self-deprecating humor. I think it just breaks the ice sometimes. And
Yeah.
you've just reminded me of something one of my mentors said. He said, if you are fighting with each other, it's because you care.
Yes.
And let's not forget that. So fighting is not always bad. What are some of the common challenges or mistakes that people do, though, when they're trying to resolve their conflict?
The first challenge would be pretending it's not there. I think. One really really good way of resolving a conflict is just not to talk about it or to hope it will go away. That, I think, is the one which I can really understand. Conflict is painful because it does touch those values. It touches our inner self, our inner being. And, very often people will say, hey, we're not in conflict, even if they are, virtually, kind of lawyers drawn and so on, because we don't like to identify as having conflict. But actually, acknowledging that there's a problem is so important. But often, I think it can be that you maybe don't realize there's a problem. People often, business partners will take on two business partners will take on two areas of the company, and they get quite siloed, and they kind of get into their own arena, and kind of never the twain shall meet. And you don't realize that you're kind of going off in two different directions. People, develop a kind of polite deference towards each other's authority over, the sort of the realms that actually both business partners really do have responsibility for. And if they've got different conflict styles, then it can very quickly become quite difficult to talk about difficult things.
Can you explain a little bit different conflict styles?
Yeah. So there's really good research on conflict styles, which basically says it comes down to the degree of assertiveness that you've got and the degree of cooperation. Now, we all like to think that we're cooperative, but actually some of us are really good at working on our own. So it's not there's no criticism there. But what we do see, according to a kind of matrix of those two factors, is that you might find some people deal with conflict by avoiding it or by accommodating other people's needs. They're like, well, that doesn't really work for me, but I'll just say yes to keep the peace. So that's a way in which things can kind of start to fester. The other end of the scale is you've got people who are kind of overly assertive, which might tip into being aggressive or kind of competitive, and they kind of maybe lay claim to, this is the way it should be, or it's my way or the highway. And either kind of ends of those extremes, if you've got two people who are overly accommodating, nothing gets addressed. If you've got two people who are quite aggressive, then you get fireworks, but no actual conversation. So in the middle of that, you've got basically the skills around assertive conversation and the ability to compromise and to collaborate. But many of us were never taught those skills. I mean, really, our school system is set up for us to be either deferential or competitive. So these are some really, powerful skills that we can learn. And I think being business partners is an amazing opportunity to learn those new skills of communication that then you can bring into your romantic relationships or your family relationships, because they are so transferable.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Relationships everywhere. Conflict is everywhere.
Yeah.
Doing nothing is not the answer. Are there any other common mistakes that you find?
Yeah, I think blame. I think I'd say blame is a really difficult one.
That's a real killer, isn't it?
It's a real killer. If I can lay this at someone else's door, then I don't really need to do anything about it. If the problem in the company is the other person's doing, then I kind of can abdicate responsibility. But that is really, really not going to help. And another thing I do see happening is that people don't want to blame, but they are aware that there's something going on, and instead of dealing with it, they really internalize the problems. So they will kind of bring inside that stress and distress, and it really affects well-being. It really affects mental health. So for me, that is, akin to avoiding the problem, is being aware of it, but just kind of sort of taking it all onto your own shoulders as a way of maybe kind of seeking to keep the peace. But we have to realize that's so not good for us, that level of stress in the just earlier you were talking about life balance. Well, unresolved conflict is just a massive kind of weight against a good life balance. So it comes down to, ultimately, addressing what's going on. And
Yeah.
that can be difficult.
And do you find that, back to this different conflict styles, do you find that in two business partners, equal partners, there tends to be the bully and the victim? Do you find that they tend to get into business partnership together? They like find each other, like, oh, I'm the aggressive one, you must be the accommodating one. And somehow energetically they just attract each other because the bully gets to be the bully all the time and the accommodating one will actually allow them to be.
That's so interesting. I guess I would put it as what I would see as people playing good cop, bad cop. They will, there can be, a really assertive person, extrovert person can really value having the quiet, more detail-focused introvert person who often is, just an absolute powerhouse of getting stuff done. And for the introvert, quiet person, then, oh my gosh, to have that extrovert business partner go out and maybe do the sales or have the difficult conversations is a kind of dream come true. So those kind of opposing characteristics can be really powerful for a business partnership. But it's really interesting in terms of people experiencing feeling bullied. That can actually be on either end of that relationship. And I've seen some really kind of strong individuals feel absolutely kind of harassed and kind of put into a corner by someone who, to all, to everyone else seems like the quiet one. So actually any of us, I think, can feel like we're the one that's the victim.
Yeah.
And sometimes the real silence of the one who's not so strong can be a way of holding control in a relationship, which is really, I think, unnerving for the person who maybe does have the stronger character and has been quite bombastic and always gets things done by talking about them. So the psychology of that, I think, is really complex. And yes, to your point, do people attract each other, kind of energetically? Oh my goodness, for sure. And it can be so positive, but when it goes wrong, it can be very, very painful for those same reasons.
I remember aligning 4 partners, and they have 4 different personality types, and they attracted each other, and the business was brilliant. They were top in their industry. However, the passive accommodating type, he was very accommodating in the office, but he took it all home. And when we did a 360, he included his wife in the interview. She said, "Oh, he's a very aggressive person." I mean, he wasn't like abusive or anything, but he was very very aggressive in his communication, and everything. And it was almost like he was a sponge of emotions in the office, couldn't really let it all out, right? Then at home, it became a stress point, and he brought it home to. And so if you're thinking victim, actually, if you don't get whatever that's inside you resolved, the real victim is typically your family, your children, your spouse, whatever is in your family, and also your employees. When you go back to your departmental silo and you take it all out in the whole department because you couldn't say it in the boardroom.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so scary if you think about it.
It really is. And I think that is often the big factor. People can be very reluctant to address things, but when you help them to become aware of everyone else who is kind of trapped in this conflict situation, resolve it for your spouse, resolve it for your other colleagues, even if you feel that you can keep going.
Yeah,
I
think what you do is so important and that's why I call my company the Brave Zone, and this is Brave Business Conversations, because I think a lot of people communicate and make business decisions based on fear. What's the fear that's keeping you from not saying what you have to say? And also, what's the fear that's keeping you from not shutting up? And people speak constantly, they think that means domination. No, it's complete fear, because if you actually be quiet for a second, you'll actually start to listen to people, and you'll start realizing that your views will probably need a bit of modification, and that's the fear of just defending your right. It's a fear.
Yes.
Right. So I think I love what you do, and that's why I think, the instant connection when we first met was like, oh, and if you're not in the studio, you're not looking at this wonderful woman. She's got this bright smile. You can't get mad at this face. You cannot get mad at Arabella. You're just like, oh, dang it. All right. I'll be one of those accommodating ones, But it's nice, isn't it? Because you do need to have a positive energy. When you bring that, you definitely bring a positive energy into a room. And you need that when you're in mediation.
You need optimism. People lose hope.
That's
And
true.
what I hope to bring people is a sense of that there will be a way forward. That we can find a way forward that is going to be better, that's going to bring some relief. So, yeah, I have
Fantastic.
strong faith in that.
We'll be back with more of Arabella after this.
Merry Christmas from Radio Bath.
We've been talking about different kinds of conflict styles, which I find very interesting, my new learning point today. But so what are the practical tips that you can give us about how to resolve conflicts?
Okay. So we're focusing on business partners today. So, speaking to the business partner, but you might be a manager, you might be anyone really.
We could be coworkers.
Yeah,
Sure.
co-workers, exactly. My first tip would be to organize your thoughts and to do it by writing them down. Write them down not only because it's cathartic and kind of therapeutic, but it helps you see what's there. And it can be a kind of stream of consciousness of everything that's wrong, but I have a different way. I suggest you put your thoughts into 3 arenas. First, write down what you're happy about, what you appreciate about the other person, what you appreciate about the company, your work. Allow yourself just to rest in the fact that you've done amazing stuff together, perhaps, or that there have been good times, or there maybe still are good things, and that's for you as much as for anyone. Then write down what is hard and be really specific. This writing down is for you, so write down what is difficult, what are the challenges, and then thirdly, write down your hopes. We get very stuck in the past and the present in conflict, but until we can look towards the future, we're not really shaping our way out. So that's my first tip, to organize your thoughts. My second one would be to start then to think about what you want to say. So you'll note I'm not just suggesting you give all of those written down
Right.
thoughts.
I was just going to say that. I thought we did that already, but I just realized that's your thoughts. That's not what you're going to say.
Yes, that is you getting clear for yourself how you see the situation. Only then are you going to start to think about what you might start to say, how you might articulate that. And this is for me about, before a conversation even begins, starting to think about how we can communicate to another person in a way that's not going to trigger their pain, step on their past trauma, kind of ignite their own defensiveness. So the main thing to think about in terms of how you're going to communicate is around iMessages. And I've been doing quite a lot of work with the NHS, and in the NHS there's some really good tips around conveying difficult messages. And they've got these I phrases. I think of them as the 3 W's. I wish, I worry, and I wonder. So I wish things weren't as they were, or I worry that if we don't look at this area, things might escalate, or I wonder if. And a really good I wonder if is, I wonder if you'd be willing to talk about how things are. So in this stage, we're simply for ourselves privately finding the language that we might start to use to articulate some of our concerns and open a conversation. And if we can ask our business partner or our colleague, maybe if they would be willing to have a conversation about how things are, we have done an amazing, amazing thing. So what you'll notice here in this tip is that I'm not saying open the door of the office or pick up the phone to your colleague and say what you want to say, but much more create a space where you both know you're going to have a conversation. And I think, my tip here is really to consider what are the best conditions for a fruitful conversation between you and your business partner. I sometimes talk about having a pause and recalibrate session. So we don't want someone to think that they're going into a conversation about how awful things are, but we do want them to know that we'd like a conversation where we might be, open, where we might be exploratory. And that may not be on the phone, and it may not be on a Teams meeting. It might be in person. It might be out on a walk if we want to be socially distant and we don't want to look at each other in the eye. That can really help. But also we want to have time for it. So, I think a good conversation takes 2 or 3 hours.
Agree.
So it might be that you need to say, should we stop work at 2 and go and, get a table somewhere or go for a walk and just see where we are. And I've got some tips as well on like how you might structure that conversation. But as you'll see, there's a lot of preparation before we even start chatting.
The British culture mainly revolves around pubs.
Yes.
Right? Do you recommend alcohol is involved? Even light lagers and stuff. Do you recommend, hey, let's stop at 2, go out into our local and have this conversation, and before you know it, you're into 2 pints?
That's a really good question. I think, what do I feel about that? Do you know
And you wake up in the morning, I can't believe I said that.
There is the risk that you might say things that you regret.
But then your inhibitions kind of go down, and you're like all the what is it? The accommodators and the avoiders would actually start not attacking, but I mean, will start actually getting a little bit loose and forget about all your stressful worry. Just say it.
You're so right. That is exactly what the alcohol does. It reduces our inhibitions. I think each person has to check. If I felt completely uninhibited, would what came out of my mouth to my colleague or my business partner in an unguarded moment be exactly what I'd want them to hear?
Yeah.
Would it? And for
or
some
does it
people,
does it let my guard down a bit to the point where I feel like I can be myself?
Yeah. That is really true. That is really true. I think there is value in it after a sincere conversation. I think
so. Close it with a bit of alcohol, and
possibly,
a bit of that,
yeah.
But
or have it as like, this has been really good. Why don't we meet next Friday and just chew the cud and talk. I think anything that would allow things not to be looked at with real kind of clarity of mind and sensitivity of emotional consciousness could prolong difficulties.
Yeah.
So my hunch is, go in sober.
Go in
and
sober,
have your
go
wits
out
about
sober,
you.
Then maybe wrap up next week with something. I know for sure if I were to do it, I would stay off wine because I just don't do wine I will say things like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. Yeah. Gin and tonic's good. A soft, really light lager would be actually kind of let my guard down a bit. I'd actually be a little bit more fun, but and jovial about things. But yeah, definitely, if you were going to do it with a bit of alcohol, and if you really must do it with alcohol, just pick your alcohol.
Pick your alcohol and
know yourself,
and some moderation. I think it's really interesting because what you're talking about effectively is what do we need to shift from a fight or flight state. So when we feel threatened or worried or defensive, our amygdala in our limbic system is on alert, and our sympathetic state, our autonomic nervous system goes into that fight or flight state, which means we want to either attack, which is the aggressive, or flee, which is get away from it. But there are ways to get into that calmer parasympathetic state. Go for a walk, shake it all out, do some yoga beforehand, meditate, write down the things you want to say so you feel organized. That will, in a sense, do the same as the alcohol will do in letting you feel relaxed, because that parasympathetic state is also known as tend and befriend. We've got oxytocin going, we've got all the good dopamine going. We do want our brain to feel safe to communicate.
Yeah.
So I think what you're pointing to is really crucial, actually.
Yeah, because I think maybe because people are still operating out of their fear, they don't want to make a big deal out of these talks. Let's just have it over a drink. And before you know, what you're actually doing is actually making it worse. Or it depends on the person, obviously. But I do find people toss out really, really serious subjects, just like before they do something light, like, I was thinking of changing our shareholder percentages. You want to get some lunch? Well, what do you want, Asian or Lebanese food today? And I'm just like, you don't throw it out then, it's not a casual conversation, but I think they toss it out lightly just because they're afraid to actually make it serious.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. And I think we're worried about big decisions. We're worried about suggesting something and it being knocked back. We're worried about being rejected. But ultimately, what these conversations are between business partners are negotiations. Now, we can do that with our customers and our clients easily. We're happy to negotiate terms and conditions, make requests, have, suggest offers and things like that. We get this kind of win-win deal where everyone feels happy with it. That's a commercial exchange. But we're more reluctant to negotiate amongst our peers or with our business partners. But this is all we're doing. So mediation is effectively facilitated negotiation. So when I'm mediating between two people, I'm helping them get their positions clear. I'm going to coach them that they can articulate them without triggering the other person. But we'll talk about everything that matters, so that we've cleared the air and there's nothing unsaid. And then we'll move into, well, what do we want looking forward? And unless both people can say what they want and be prepared for there to be compromise, we're never going to get a suitable future situation. So that's my role, is to help them, ask each other what they really want, and if they want to make big changes, for us to find ways to make decisions. A lot of what we're doing when we have difficulties as a business partners is that we haven't got structures for making decisions. That's all it comes down to.
Fair point. Very good point, actually. And that's exactly what you need to work on. And sometimes the facilitator will be so much more helpful than trying to figure this out by yourself. I'll be back with the last segment with Arabella after this.
Made locally in Bath. This is Radio Bath.
We are on our last segment of Brave Business Conversation. We've been having such a great time talking about this. It's a very interesting thing. With all the tips you're giving us, from my personal experience coaching businesses, partners, etc., I know that it's really hard to do it by yourself, especially if you're trying to say, okay, let's have this structure and that structure. It just feels weird, right, when it's your own business. What's the difference? What are you going to do if you help them mediate when you're in the room?
Essentially, the risk people have from having a conversation is it going to erupt? So my role is to create psychological safety by facilitating the space. And people worry about, will it get emotional? Will I get interrupted? So the first thing we do is allow each person to just kind of speak their own perspective and we call it uninterrupted time. And we really encourage each other just to listen to each other, and we, then I might help them speak back and forth. But it's about inquiry. It's about getting curious around an understanding of each other's perspective on things, and then we draw that to the point where we have basically a list of the themes. It's a kind of an agenda of what needs to be looked at for things to turn out right in the end. That's a good place for a break, and it might be that would be the end of that meeting and you would have a second meeting. But it's basically a change of gear from looking backwards to now we're going to look forwards. And then I help people basically decide on their very future-focused kind of practical solutions and steps. And that's where we've got the negotiation. And I can help people really reality test, because often people say, oh, we'll do it like this. And I can say, what does that mean? Who will do it? What's the time scale? And what happens if it goes wrong? So we can get something that's really kind of watertight. And I suggest that people write things down. If it's just about the relationship, I help them structure a kind of memorandum of understanding about what they've decided. It's not legally binding, but it's their agreement. That said, if they are deciding to part ways, then there can be a kind of a legal settlement document. I always advise people to take advice, and we can always have lawyers involved in a mediation if needed. There's, it's not just about everyone kind of getting along. It's about really understanding what needs to be in place for the future to feel safe and secure for everyone involved.
No, I find that it's the biggest gift people like you and me can give to a partnership, sometimes knowing when to stop.
Yes.
Yeah, and I've had 2 experiences in the past where actually individual partners started their own businesses and flourished, whereas this partnership was good, but it wasn't great.
Yeah.
So, or it's kind of done.
Yeah.
But anyway, great. So how can people get in touch? Again, I would definitely say if you are a listener, you've got you're either with your coworkers or with your business partners experiencing some kind of conflict, don't try to do this by yourself. At least just contact Arabella for a conversation. You always give a free diagnosis or something like that, right? But how do people get in touch with you?
So find me, I'm arabellatresilian.com, and I'm also on social media as School of Dialogue, where I share lots of tips and ideas.